Your fellow at the Atlantic Council, and we are going to start with a very easy issue, namely Syria. Although, of course, I don't think we can talk about that without also bringing in the latest developments between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the worsening sectarian divide, which obviously suggests that this war is going to go on a while longer. We have a great panel. We're going to begin with Dr. Murat Yesiltas. He's director of SETA Foundation's security program. He got his BA and MA at Sakarya University and a PhD at Marmara University. He's currently a visiting researcher at Lancaster University and at Virginia Tech. I'm sorry, he was a visiting researcher at Lancaster University and Virginia Tech, and he's currently associate professor in the Department of International Relations at Sakarya University. He's got a PowerPoint for us, so without further ado, Dr. Yesiltas, why don't you begin? I believe this is about the border situation for Turkey.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here with you. I would like to focus on, in my presentation, Turkey's border security, particularly by focusing on the Syrian civil war and its effect on, Turkey's border security during the last 2 years. But before I move on the discussion, the presentation, I would like to emphasize some conceptual framework and historical, background. I don't want to bore with you the historical part of my presentation, but I believe that it's very important to understand the huge transformation, in Turkey's border security, particularly in the last 2 years. So as you know, Turkey is a kind of multi-regional power, and Turkey has a different, border complexities, and therefore it's a kind of different geopolitical complexities around Turkey. For example, when you look at the Turkey's western border, you will see the different geopolitical complexities, and it is not comparable with the Middle Eastern border of Turkey, and there is also different geopolitical complexities in Turkey's Middle Eastern border. So therefore, the securing Turkey's border is very important, not only in terms of the domestic politics, but also in the foreign policy domain. So I would like to, first of all, give a brief historical transformation, because, we are witnessing a huge and dramatic and radical transformation in Turkish border security. When we compare the understanding of Turkey's border security before the Arab Spring, so it was a different and liberal border security understanding. But after the Arab Spring, we will, we see the different kind of border security understanding. But from the early republic to 1990s, I think we can easily divided Turkey's border security understanding into 4 different, parts, or 4 different periods. I'm generally speaking, from early republic to the 1990s, Turkey has a, traditional border security which based on territorial integrity and military-driven protection of the borders, and militarized border regime and institutional structures were very important, and strong army were seen as the main solution to protect Turkey's border, not only in the Middle East, but also other, borders. And after the 1980s, the PKK threat, emerged in terms of the Turkey's Syrian and Iraqi border. In the second period, I call it as a transition period. It started 1990s until 2000, and there was an uncertainty simply because of the emerging new threats, including migration, immigration, the transformation of Kurdish question, and PKK threat, and diversification of the threat was threats were the main determinants and driving factors behind the Turkey's border security. And the third period, we can, I think, define it as new border security regime emerged. Because when Just and Development Party, the AK Party came to power, they changed the mentality of the border security, and we have been witnessing the fall and decline of the traditional border security understanding. The liberal idea emerged in border security because of the changing understanding of the nation state of Turkey, And zero problem, as you know, was one of the important idea behind this border security. It was a flexible border security understanding, which based on open door policy. And in terms of the foreign policy, implication, the strategic partnership with the Middle Eastern countries, was the main idea behind this open door and flexible border policy. And a trading state was one of the important concepts behind this understanding. And I think the impact of the EU process was also the driving force behind the Turkey's border security. And so we began to discuss the new border security structure in terms of the institution, in terms of the mentality. But when we came to the Arab Spring, everything began to change. And in the Arab Spring, of course, new threats emerged, and the new geopolitical challenge, began to influence Turkey's border security. And it was security-driven for border security was the main idea, simply because of the new geopolitical threat against Turkey, including, the Daesh or other kinds of non-state military actors. So, and the main problem in that period, I think it was also a new kind of securitization process by the Western countries, especially on the Turkey's Syrian border. So, after, this brief, introduction about the Turkey's history of border security understanding, I would like to focus on the Syrian border during the Syrian civil war. I think Turkey has three structural problems over Turkish-Syrian border that have jeopardizing the security of the border. The first one is, if you look at the map, I think you can understand easily what I am talking about. The first one is Turkey has a length of 911 kilometers border with Syria, which makes it impossible to provide 100% of security in terms of sufficient personnel, technology, and financial capacities. And secondly, since Turkey has been implementing open door policy at its border for the people fleeing from the civil war in Syria, identifying terrorists amongst millions of people has emerged as a very challenging task. I think this part is very important to understand the transformation in Turkey's border security understanding. And thirdly, due to the fact that responsibility for border protection is shared among many, institutions, we don't have any, particular institution which is dealing with the border security architecture. We have many institutions and we have many actors because of our, open door policy before the Arab Spring, which was very important, and confusion of authority just until the 2014. There was a confusion of authority, and lack of primacy institution solely responsible to protect border has caused the intensification. But I think this, dimension began to change after 2014. So, and what kind of threat Turkey has, emanating threats from the Syria to Turkey? I think there have been three major threats from Syria toward Turkey, diversifying and identifying the challenges. The first threat is coming from Daesh cross-border attack. I will show the number of Daesh attack against Turkey between 2012 and 2014. And PYD, of course, is another threat in terms of providing PKK weapon and equipment. This is a kind of possibility. I mean, it's a kind of possibility. And the Assad regime, of course, we have also, the Syrian regime at least 4 times attacked Turkey by using the border. So, and when you look at the numbers, I'm not sure whether you can see but we have many attacks from the across the border. When we look at the actors, so Assad regime, Daesh, and so two main actors have been attacking Turkey in last 2 years. So what about the changing mentality of the Turkey's Syrian border? So we can say a couple of things about that, but I would like to focus more on the technical and security measures, which is very important to understand the changing mentality of Turkish border security, because you did not have any kind of, you know, border or in your mind as well before the Arab Spring. But after the Arab Spring, after the intensification of the Syrian border, you had a kind of you began to build a security wall. I mean, this is very important in terms of the understanding of the changing idea and the changing structure of the Turkey's border. So a physical and military security measure adopted by Turkey throughout the Syrian border consists of, as below, as you can see, trenches, concentrate-based fence wire, concentrate walls, bastion barriers, patrol roads, border lightening, and enhancing both quality and quantity of military personnel, armored vehicles, technology, and infrastructure. In the first one, this is an example of the trenches Turkey built last 1.5 years. Turkey built 386 kilometers of trenches along the Syrian border. And this is also another example. This is the new, I think, infrastructure of Turkey's Syrian border. In terms of the fence and wires, 108 kilometers of reinforced wire mesh and concentrate base fence wire were built along the border. And I think this is another example. Turkey began to build a new security wall along the Syrian border. And this is also the kind of what Turkey is planning to do in near future. It's a kind of new structure of Turkey's Syrian border. This is a kind of concentrate walls, and trench, patrol road, and lightning. This is another example. I mean, the physical measures of Turkey, security measures of Turkey in the Syrian border, and this is the number of the personnel serving at the Syrian border. As you see, 30% of the Turkish armed force personnel serving at the borders are tasked of protecting the Syrian border as of 2015. Do you have enough time?
Actually, I'd like you to stop there maybe and just ask you a couple questions quickly. There's been a lot of controversy over a gap in the border. The U.S. has constantly pressed Turkey to close an area on the border with Syria. I think is it 61 kilometers or 68 kilometers? How much success has Turkey made in finally closing this remaining gap, and why has it stayed open so long, if I could ask you that question?
Because, first of all, I think the physical, structure of the border is very important to accomplish these kind of physical measures, and Turkey began to build this kind of, physical measures just after the 2014. This is the main obstacle, in order to finish Turkey's border security measures. And so therefore, I think it's going to be finished around maybe 4 or 6 months. I'm not sure about the duration, but it's going to be finished, particularly in the southern, western part of the Turkish-Syrian border. Should I continue, or we can? I think continue also Q&A and session.
Yeah, no, we're going to move to some of the other speakers.
Oh, yeah.
But is there any?
I have always problem with the time.
But
as an academician.
I did want to slip in one other, and maybe this is more appropriate for the next panel. But I saw some reports yesterday that the Kurds have actually moved now west of the Euphrates, and we know that they're trying to fill this gap by linking up 2 of their enclaves in northern Syria. And I just wondered if there was any confirmation that you've seen that they have actually moved west of the Euphrates.
I don't have this kind of confirmation. I don't have.
Okay.
Maybe
someone
watching.
else will.
If somebody else has, I don't know.
We're going to move now to our next
okay.
our next speaker from Turkey, Mesut Ozcan. Got it. Director of the Diplomacy Academy, and he's an advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was previously a visiting scholar at Kuwait University's Department of Political Science. He's also worked at Istanbul's Tikaret University. He studied at St. Antony's College, Oxford, and defended his dissertation at Boğaziçi University. He's written 3 books. He's published many articles and chapters on Turkish foreign policy, and he's on the editorial boards of Insight Turkey, Divan, and Perceptions. And I wanted to turn to you, and if we could get a little early reaction about the latest developments between Iran and Syria, the execution of Sheikh Nimr, the trashing of the Saudi embassy, the breaking of relations now, or downgrading of relations between many Sunni Muslim countries and Iran, and how you think this is going to affect the situation in Syria. Most of us here in Washington have been fairly skeptical of the prospects for a political solution. I read this morning on Twitter, one of my colleagues from the Associated Press says that the current plan envisions Assad staying in power beyond Barack Obama's term, which is a nice way of kicking the can down the road. I would really like to have your perspective on where the diplomacy currently stands vis-a-vis a solution to the Syria war, and then any other comments you'd like to make on the border situation.
Shall I start with these questions? Or?
Please, if you would, and then your other remarks. Okay. Thanks.
Actually, the developments taking place recently are also a reflection of the divisive nature of the politics in the region. Unfortunately, with the conflict going on after the Arab Spring in the region, we increasingly see a kind of division among the sectarian lines, but at the same time, some political issues are also very much affecting these things. And regarding the latest developments between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Turkey urged both sides to deal in the regional issues in a political manner, at the same time to de-escalate the conflict, because it is also becoming very dangerous for both of the countries, but at the same time for both of the region. There are several problems or several interpretations that this will negatively affect the solution, as you mentioned, regarding the Syrian conflict. But this also shows that how Syrian conflict is affecting the regional politics, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, although they are not very in love with one another. But with the Syrian conflict, on different sides of the conflict, the bilateral relations are also getting very affected by this conflict very negatively. So this is not a positive thing. And also, we also saw that with the declarations coming from other regional countries, especially from Gulf countries, so it has also a regional dimension. So in the coming months, maybe, we will have some more turmoil or more problems, unfortunately, emanating from this conflict. But on the other hand, there are some attempts to overcome this tension and to decrease the tension, because we still have enough of problems in the region. We do not want to have more of these problems. So I hope there will be some kind of communication between two sides, and also this will help to de-escalate the conflict, because we first focus on the Syrian conflict. But on the other hand, this problem also showed us once again the urgency of finding a solution to the Syrian conflict, Syrian problem. So at the end of this month, we hope that there will be a kind of new beginning for the political solution, for some political talks. So we will see what will happen in a couple of weeks, if we will be able to start in 25th of this month for these talks. If we have a kind of successful start, then we may have some progress. But the latest developments in the last week show that it is not very easy road to go. Just to say a few words about the panel that I will prepared. If we talk about Turkish-Syrian relations, we should also have some kind of historical background. And in my understanding, the current developments in terms of Turkish-Syrian relations are very much affected by the historical perspective. We all know the very good relations between Turkey and Syria between 1990 and 2011. And in my understanding, this period was an exception. Why? Because from the very establishment of the Republic of Turkey during 1920s, 30s, and during the Cold War years, unfortunately, Turkey and Syria at the time, and they were under French control, were not very friendly in terms of their relations. There were several reasons of it. During the early years of the Republic, because of the Hatay issue, Alexandria issue, there were some problems. And during the Cold War years, there were other problems regarding the ideological differences between Turkey and Syria. Turkey was a member of NATO. Syria was in close alliance with the USSR. So, unfortunately, two neighbors, but they were distant neighbors. And during 1960s and 70s, terror issues, at the same time, water issue was also dominating the agenda of bilateral relations. So, beginning with 1970s, 1980s, Syria tried to use PKK card against Turkey in order to have some concessions in the case of rates. And the 1990s was the same. And as I said, the period 1999 to 2011 was an exception. And for example, during 2000s, we witnessed another era, a very positive era, and this time we witnessed visit of Syrian President to Turkey. But as two neighbors, this was the first visit of a presidential visit to Turkey from Syrian side. This means, although Turkey and Syria were neighbors for many years, but their political relations were not that positive. And after the Arab Spring, after 2011, we witnessed back to the old days, the differences in terms of ideological different security issues. And currently the Syrian conflict, as Murat summarized some part of it, created several obstacles for Turkey. From the security perspective, the PKK issue, then ISIL, these are all creating problems for Turkey. Bombings in Ankara, in Suruc, in other parts of Turkey at the same time, with the increasing activities of PKK, PYD, and also arms they are getting from different sources. They're increasingly using these arms against Turkey. So this is creating a security problem. On the other hand, this has also some political problems for Turkey as well. The developments in Syria contribute to derailing of the peace process in Turkey, in my understanding, in terms of the Kurdish question. So the developments also negatively affected the political dynamics in Turkey. Economically, this also created some problems because Turkey and Syria developed good economic relations during 2000s. They signed free trade agreement, and the number of trade volume between two countries were increasing till 2011. Although there was a decline, but I recently checked the latest numbers. So still the amount, despite all of things going on in Syria, the amount of trade between Turkey and Syria equaling the level of 2010, 2011, even today. But this means it's below the potential. And also in terms of social issues, this conflict is also creating several problems because of the refugees, more than 2 million in Turkey, and providing security, providing education, providing health services to these people is a huge burden for Turkey, for Turkish economy, for Turkish society, and also integrating all of these people. And just an example, in the province of Kilis, neighboring Syria, the number of Syrians are outnumbering the number of Turks. So this means a huge social impact on Turkey, and especially the governorates bordering Syria. So the conflict in Syria is creating several challenges for Turkey. For this reason, Turkey is after a quick solution as soon as possible, a political solution to the conflict in Syria, because as you asked in the beginning, this is not only affecting Turkey, but also affecting the regional dynamics in a very negative way, and increasing the division among the countries in terms of political views and also ethnic and sectarian identity politics as well. So I hope with the proposed talks beginning this month, we will have a quick, as soon as a solution to the conflict, and this will also help the Syrian people, more than 7 million out of the country in different parts and also inside different cities inside Syria. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just ask one other question. I mentioned this transition plan that has been leaked now today. Talks about an 18-month transition, so Bashar al-Assad remaining in power through into 2017, March of 2017 at the earliest, that he would step down. Is that something that you think Turkey can accept, this kind of slow transition away from Assad, given its demands in the past that Assad stepped down?
Actually, when there were talks about this transition period, Turkey from the beginning stated that the transition period should start with his stepping down. But currently there were also reports, or that there were some arguments from different sources, and also Turkish authorities also said that we should have a plan, a timetable, where it is stated that in which part, in which month he will step down, but this plan should be accepted, should be declared from the very beginning, and it should be accepted by all the parties. So, although there was some kind of understanding for a transition period, but still several questions remained unanswered, and this was one of the questions. So, still we are not very clear on this. We will see with this month. I hope we will have an understanding, but it is not very, let's say, promising, given the conditions on the ground, that we will have a fixed, understood, agreed timetable by both parties in that regard.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, we'll move on, I guess, to Trita next. Trita Parsi, I'm sure, is known to many of you here in Washington. He's the founder and president of the National Iranian American Council. He's an expert on U.S.-Iran relations, Iranian foreign policy, and the geopolitics of the Middle East. He's the author of 2 excellent books, including Treacherous Alliance, The Secret Dealings of Iran, Israel, and the United States. He's got a lot of experience on Capitol Hill at the UN, and he's frequently consulted by Western and Asian governments on foreign policy matters. He studied for his doctoral thesis at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, and he also holds degrees from Uppsala University and the Stockholm School of Economics. So Trita, I'll go to you. I know you've already written about this, and certainly something we've all been writing about, commenting about in the last few days, and that is this deepening rift between Iran and Saudi Arabia, how that affects the prospects for any kind of resolution of the Syria crisis, and how you see Turkey actually fitting into it. I mean, Turkey has at times tried to mediate regional disputes, and as has been mentioned, there have been appeals for de-escalation. I don't know if anybody in Riyadh or Tehran will listen, but maybe you can tell us.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for that kind introduction, and good morning to everyone, and thank you to SETA for organizing this morning panel. As to your specifics of your question, I think it's important to keep in mind Turkey actually did quite effectively mediate earlier on in 2010 and managed to get together with the help of the Brazilians, the Iranians, to sign an agreement that unfortunately Washington wasn't ready for at the time. But it's important to note that that was a different era. That was an era in which trust between Turkey and Iran was much, much higher than it is today. Most of that has been diminished as a result of the 2 sides taking different sides in the Syrian conflict. And I've seen that Turkey has offered to mediate between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I think part of the problem there is that it's going to be really difficult finding any state that actually has a modicum of trust and confidence both in Tehran and in Riyadh at the same time, which is a critical component in order to be able to diffuse the tensions that currently exist between Saudi and Iran. And I'll get a little bit more into that during my short presentation, if that's okay, Barbara.
Please.
I was going to give a brief presentation on how I think the Iranians currently view the situation in the region and how they see things developing. I think it's important to first keep a couple of things in mind. From the Iranian perspective, the nuclear deal that was struck a couple of months ago was a significant victory because it helped them achieve several objectives. The 2 main objectives that were immediately achieved by the nuclear deal is that, first and foremost, the main goal of the Iranians for the last at least 2.5, 3 decades has been for Iran to be rehabilitated into the international community, to make sure that it has a seat at the regional decision-making table. Iran has been excluded politically from these affairs, and in the last 5 or so years also economically because of the sanctions. And the Iranian perception has been that Iran has a right to have a role and an influence in international and in the regional affairs commensurate with its geopolitical weight. That, of course, has been resisted. There's been a policy of containment and exclusion, particularly from Washington's side, but the Iran nuclear deal essentially signaled an end to that. The United States has made it clear to many of its allies in the region that it is no longer going to pursue an all-out effort to contain and exclude Iran from regional affairs. The Europeans have made it quite clear that they view the nuclear deal as a first step towards a broader rapprochement with Tehran and view Iran as potentially a stabilizing force in the region, at least recognizing that Iran has the ability to be a major stabilizing force in the region. And the engagement between Iran and the Europeans, of course, have heated up quite extensively. It's also important to keep in mind that this is not a Western perspective exclusively. You see similar trends in China as well. For the first time in a very long time, actually, the Iranians themselves had pursued the Chinese for several years in the hope that China would have a strategic relationship with Iran. The Chinese were at the time not interested. They did not want to do anything that would rock the boat of their desire to keep a balance between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But about a year and a half ago, I believe it was in Tajikistan, the Chinese foreign minister approached the Iranian foreign minister and explained that China views its relations with Iran as strategic. And it has been pushing to be able to strengthen those ties, partly as a result of a Chinese assessment that Iran is one of the more stable countries in the region and Saudi Arabia is not. And it did not want to have all of its eggs in the Saudi basket. All of these developments, and of course, very importantly, that there is now an ongoing and rather constructive dialogue between Secretary Kerry and Zarif on an ongoing basis, are significant changes and major wins from the Iranian perspective. And at the same time, important to keep in mind that the compromise in the JCPOA was one in which the Iranians retained a key objective, which is that they're going to continue to have a nuclear program. They're going to continue to have enrichment on Iranian soil. Part of the reason why this was very important for them from a position of sovereignty is that if that had been excluded, Iran would have been relegated to being a fourth-level country. There would be countries that are nuclear powers and are members of the NPT. There would be NPT countries that are not nuclear powers, but they're within the NPT. There are countries that are outside of the NPT and have nuclear weapons, such as Israel and Pakistan, India, and now North Korea. And then there would be Iran, a member of the NPT, but singularly the only country that would not even be able to allow to have enrichment. That was avoided through the JCPOA from the Iranian perspective. Yet these achievements have taken place in the context of several negative and oftentimes interdependent developments. First and foremost, of course, the resistance from some key states in the region, primarily Saudi Arabia and Israel, to not allow Iran to be rehabilitated, to not allow a major shift, or let me put it this way, not allow the West to recognize and accept that a major shift has occurred in the region. Not accommodate a greater role for Iran in the region. And I think some of the measures of Saudi Arabia recently may be an effort to reverse this. Secondly, the rise of sectarianism, something that Iran itself is not innocent in when it comes to promoting. But sectarianism is in Iran viewed as the #1 national security threat right now. Let's just keep in mind where Iran is and its standing in the Arab Street is today compared to what it was roughly 10 years ago. In 2006 when Israel and Hezbollah ended up having a major fight. At that time, because of the perception of a Hezbollah victory over Israel, Mahmoud became one of the most popular names as judged by, one of the indicators is who's most popular in Egypt, the most populous Arab state. Nasrallah was the #2, or we may have been reversed. Today, as a result of Syria, and the perception of Iran's role in Syria, Iran's standing in the Arab Street is probably as low as it was during the Iraq-Iran war. And it has lost significant soft power assets in the Arab world. Thirdly, the collapse of states that have been taking place directly following the Arab Spring, in which Syria itself could be potentially included into it, but certainly we've seen that in Libya, for instance. And finally, of course, Syria itself, which has created significant tensions. It has changed Turkish-Iranian relations from something that was quite promising and positive just a couple of years ago to something that is now very, very tense and problematic. Now, Syria itself has had a significant high cost for the Iranians. And there should be no illusion that there's also been a lot of opposition inside of Iran to Tehran's Syria policy, although that opposition has significantly reduced as a result of the emergence of Daesh, ISIS. But from the Iranian perspective, much of what Iran's interests and positions in Syria have increasingly been adopted by other states as well. The policies of other states on Syria, and from the Iranian perspective, have tended to gravitate towards where Iran has been standing. The West is now no longer insisting that Assad leave at the beginning of a process, and as Barbara mentioned earlier on, the time frame has now even been indicated to be more than a year before Assad would have to leave. Priority is clearly, increasingly, Daesh and jihadists rather than the ousting of Assad. And we've seen that very much, particularly in this town. Agreement that a collapse of the Syrian state would lead to greater instability and that has to be avoided. These are all Iranian positions from 3-4 years ago that increasingly have been adopted by other powers as well. Now, this may explain partly some of the Saudi panic and some of the efforts that the Saudis have taken on in the last couple of days, presumably to instigate some form of escalation that potentially could reverse some of these trends. But I think it's important to recognize that despite of Iran's relative gains here, arguably all of them are more or less reversible. And facts on the ground, for instance, in Syria can change. And you can end up with a very different scenario in the foreseeable future if developments there go in an opposite direction. The willingness of the international community to bet on the idea that a more included Iran will also be a more prudent and responsible Iran has clearly been shaken by the Iranian attack on the Saudi embassy, around 1,000 people attacking, torching that embassy, while the Iranian police largely stood by and watched. Now, there's been condemnations from the Iranian president, and perhaps more importantly, there's been condemnation by senior people within the IRGC of that attack. And that's a rather new development. When the Iranians attacked, and this is really disgraceful that there's so many attacks on embassies in Iran in recent history, but when the Iranians attacked the British embassy in 2011, it took almost 9 or 10 months before hardliners in Iran started to grudgingly admit that that was probably a mistake. Now you have condemnations even from conservative elements within days of this happening. So the pushback and the cost of that type of irresponsible behavior is coming much sooner. It's not sufficient in my view. These things should not take place at all. But nevertheless, it's interesting to see that has happened. So if I could just wrap it up, just sum it up by saying that despite many of Iran's gains over the last couple of years, I think Iran still faces more questions than answers when it looks at the region.
Thank you, Trita. Thanks very much. And our cleanup hitter, Cedric Layton is the founder and president of Cedric Layton Associates, a strategic risk, cybersecurity, and leadership management consultancy. He's a former U.S. Air Force intelligence officer and has become an internationally known strategic risk and cybersecurity expert. He's appeared on many television programs. He's also a regular contributor to the Capital Insider program. Cedric, if I may call you Cedric, please give us the American perspective as it watches this region in turmoil. U.S. relations, which with Turkey have not been exactly problem-free, certainly in recent years because of disagreements about Syria and other issues. How do you see the situation right now? And is there any possibility that this new crisis could have a silver lining?
Well, there's always, I think, Barbara, a desire for a silver lining, and sometimes I think we hope for, against all hope, that there will be that silver lining in Washington. But thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you, SETA, for putting on this really great and interesting session today. I think that U.S. relations with Turkey and with this part of the world in general are basically characterized by several different things. One of them is suspicion. Suspicion because of past events, suspicion because of a lack of understanding of the culture, of the religion, of the way of life of many of the different people that inhabit the Middle East, but also a lack of understanding about the historical context in which this region has evolved. I thought it was very interesting, when we looked at the presentation on border security, a lot of what it reminded me of was experiences that I personally had during the Cold War, when you saw borders that were as fortified, such as between West and East Germany or West and East Berlin. You would see that kind of thing. So that evolved into my own personal view of international relations, that sometimes countries that have really strong border fortifications have a tenuous hold, a more tenuous hold on their ability to control foreign policy and domestic policy events. So that is something that I think all countries that engage in these kinds of border control mechanisms sometimes have to do them, like Turkey has to do it in this particular case, but they also have to be careful that when these border controls continue for a long time, there may be the law of unforeseen consequences. And those are some of the things that, that need to be looked at, even though obviously in the case of Syria, Turkey desires, I believe, to contain what is going on there. So when it comes to the relationship that the United States has with Turkey, I think that there is a desire to work with the government in Ankara in a way that is characterized by hope, but also by a bit of suspicion that Turkey is going to try to go it alone. They're going to do certain things in order to go ahead and not only secure Turkey's place in the region, but also to enhance Turkey's place in the region. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but this is just what I believe to be Washington's view. And remember that Washington's view is not a monolithic view. There are going to be different currents that occur within the political discourse, even within specific political parties. So you can't expect all Democrats to say one thing and believe one thing, and you can't expect all Republicans to say and believe one specific thing. In some cases, you will find people from both political parties agreeing with each other just because of the way that they personally view the foreign policy aspects that are required here. So when it comes to Turkey, the United States sees Turkey, was hopeful that Turkey would be, in essence, a harbinger of democracy in the Middle East. And the reason I say that is because I go back to the Arab Spring and the hope that the Arab Spring engendered not only in Libya, but also in Egypt. In those specific areas. It also, of course, looked at what was happening in Iran, and it looked at what was happening in Bahrain and other countries of the Arab world. So the picture becomes a very complicated one when things don't work out the way that you think they might work out. So in the case of the Arab Spring, we all know what happened in Egypt, we all know what happened in Libya, and we see that these kinds of foreign policy approaches were, in essence, not successful. And I say it's a foreign policy approach because it affected the foreign policies of both the United States and Turkey. It also affected the way in which certain countries existed, the way in which their political lives were conducted. So when you take the case of Egypt, for example, and the advent of the Muslim Brotherhood, obviously an ally of the Turkish government, at least during the initial stages, that regime came up against the internal power structures of the Egyptian state. Those internal power structures were basically controlled by the Egyptian military. The Egyptian military was not willing to go down the path that the Muslim Brotherhood had envisioned for the country. And they also saw this as a way in which they could go ahead and, in essence, stop that kind of a movement in the Arab world. And rightly or wrongly, the United States has had to change its policy approach, at first very sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood and, quite frankly, to Turkey's efforts in the region. But then it became an issue where I think realpolitik and geopolitics in essence, took over. Not only was there a difference in the way things were happening on the ground, but you also had the issue of we have a situation where the Egyptian power structure itself does not want to continue with that particular regime. So that regime was dispensed with. The Morsi regime was thrown out, the Egyptian military reasserted control, and in essence, we have a bit of a status quo ante situation where the US and Turkish foreign policies, instead of being congruent with each other, were somewhat opposed to each other. When it came to the actual way in which the Turkish government and the American government looked at the situation in Syria, there were some areas where obviously there is agreement. Both sides want to go after ISIS or Daesh. They want to make sure that that particular destabilization factor is eliminated from the Middle Eastern equation. The next question, though, is what comes next? And the news that Barbara mentioned this morning about Assad possibly staying as long as 17 or so months in power, that is a most definite change in the way in which US foreign policy views the Syrian situation. It is a tacit admission that they will never admit outright, but I can say it because I don't work for anybody in the State Department. It's basically an admission that this policy that they had viewed as being the successful one, the one that would eliminate Assad, is not successful. It is not workable. It is not realistic, especially if you don't want to commit military forces to eliminate someone like Assad. So in its effort to look for a non-military solution, or as much of a non-military solution as possible in the Syrian situation, the compromise policy position has basically become this. We will tolerate Assad for the meantime. And like you said, it is also a congruence with Iran. And that brings up some very interesting points, because now we are seeing, in essence, a possible reliving of the strategic relationship that the United States had with Iran prior to 1979 and the Iranian Revolution. So if the United States goes ahead and pursues its policy in Syria that is now forming, where Assad stays in power longer, Daesh is contained and eliminated potentially, then you have an area where the Iranians can actually work with the United States. They may not do so overtly, but that allows Iran, the United States, and Turkey to work together for a common goal. And then the idea is that that would allow the United States, Iran, Turkey, and like-minded powers to basically create a major sphere of, don't want to say contentment exactly, but a sphere of stability in the region of the Middle East. What that does, though, is it shuts out the Sunni-ruled nations. I didn't say Sunni majority because some are Sunni-ruled and not Sunni majority population, but the Sunni-ruled nations have a very difficult area to work in right now because they see Iran as a threat. They also have been, in essence, coached by the United States to oppose Iran on many fronts, both diplomatic and economic, and now they are confused by the fact that the United States is beginning to establish a strategic relationship with the Iranians. And that process will inevitably result in not only hurt feelings on the part of the Sunni nations, but it will also result in a significant weakening of their economic power and their social power in not only their part of the world, but also globally. And that has a significant effect, I think, on what will happen in the Middle East, and it will also have a significant impact on how the United States not only is perceived around the world, but also will have a significant impact on the ability of the United States to carry out whatever policies it decides to carry out in the Middle East. So there are significant issues, both from a diplomatic standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint, as well as a military standpoint in this. And that, I believe, is what is happening right now. We see this rapprochement happening with Iran in fits and starts, and the real difficulty that occurred with the execution of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr is the fact that all of these things came to a boil and now made it very difficult for the United States to covertly work with the Iranians. Now that work has to either be overt or somewhat tempered by the resulting furor that has occurred within the Middle East on both sides of this equation.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to open up now to questions from the floor. If you could wait for a microphone, I think there's a microphone, yeah, that will come to you, and you can state your name and affiliation if you like, and please ask a question and say whether it's directed to one of the people on the panel. So the lady sitting on the steps over there. Mm-hmm. One sec.
Hi, thank you, SETA, for having this wonderful conference again this year. My question is first to Trita. Hi, Trita. I was just wondering,
could you tell me your name?
Oh, Ilhan Kagri from the Muslim Public Affairs Council.
Thank you.
Could you explain to us what Iran was thinking when it, decided to side with Assad, completely, absolutely, because, I'm of the assumption that Iran has some really smart people working in its government. And surely it must have known that this is a dead-end situation. And in addition to that, it puts its relationship with Turkey in a kind of stressful environment, which neither country wants. So, one, what was Iran thinking? And secondly, what is Iran thinking now in terms of how it's now, it's going to lose face clearly. How's it going to get out of this mess?
Are you calling to all the questions?
Go for it,
okay.
yeah.
I just wanted to get your okay. Thank you for that question, and I think it's a very important question. I think the question included in a couple of assessments that I assume the Iranians would not agree with, in the sense that this is going to be costing them face, etc., etc. It certainly has cost them a lot, but there are several different reasons, I think, as to why they ended up being such hardcore supporters of Assad. First of it has to do a lot with history. Back in the 1980s, there was only one Arab country that sided with Iran against the entire Arab world and much of the Western world that was on the side of Iraq in its invasion and aggression against Iraq. And that was Assad's father. And the Iranians have a very long-term view of the region. They know that one of their advantages vis-a-vis particularly the United States is that when it comes to confidence and trust and reliability, there's always this question in the minds of American allies: how long will the United States really be committed to the region? How long will it stay? Well, Iran isn't going anywhere. It's going to be there forever. And as a result, it's taking advantage of that and showing that it will side with its allies and it will honor past favors that they have done to Iran, because it believes that in the long run, even though it does pay a very significant short-term cost and maybe perhaps a longer-term cost as well, but in the long run, it will position Iran better to be a leading state in the region by being able to say that it's reliable. Now, did they think it's going to be this costly? Probably not. Did they miscalculate on many fronts? I'm pretty confident that they themselves would probably think that they did. But for them, it was also a way, in their perspective, to reestablish their deterrence. Because in the beginning, the support that was coming to the forces against Assad were coming from quite a few places. And many of those places made it very clear that, Assad and Syria is really not the price. The price is to set back Iran geopolitically. That this is about cutting off Iran's access to the Levant, etc., etc. It's not as if Iranians don't watch CNN. They read the Washington Post. And whether they took those calculations entirely seriously or not. I think the indications are that yes, they did. And they viewed this not so much as just an attack on Assad, but more broadly on them as well. Moreover, I think it was in 2010 that a defense agreement was signed between Syria and Iran, which is the only defense agreement Iran has. It's not part of any security pact or anything like that at all. I think these are some important factors that explain. But like everyone else, including Turkey, once this whole thing got started, it became a mess. And it's been a tactical roller coaster to try to find a way out of it. But the point I was trying to make earlier on, the Iranians believe that they have established their deterrence because so many forces were coming on the side against Assad, and through Iranian help, Assad survived. And by that, they established that their power is very significant, and you have to work with Iran in order to be able to get a solution. Now, they are co-responsible, together with many other states, for the mess that exists there. And as a result, they have to work very hard now to find a way out. I think if there's going to be any loss of face, I think it's going to be on many different places, not just on the Iranian side.
Okay, thanks. David Ottaway.
Dave Ottaway from the Woodrow Wilson Center. Erdogan was just in Saudi Arabia, and they held talks together. And the one thing they have in common is that they believe that Assad should go at the beginning of the transition process, not at the end of the transition process. What's your reading of how Turkey is going to react to this plan that Barbara has just been talking about, of allowing Assad to stay in power? And what's this going to do to this burgeoning relationship between Turkey and Saudi Arabia over Syria?
I think that's for you. And if I could add also, what is Turkey part of this new Sunni alliance that the Saudis announced with much fanfare a couple of weeks ago?
Regarding the last part of the question, Turkey from the very beginning stated this is a kind of gathering. It is not a kind of security. I think security alliance or joint army or anything like this. So any type of effort, international effort to fight with extremism and also to fight with these type of terrorist networks. Regarding the question about Turkey and Saudi Arabia, the visit was planned visit, but at the same time we should not forget that there are some improvements in terms of Turkish-Saudi relations. Although there were some differences after the developments in Egypt, but lately there are some, with the change of the king in Saudi Arabia, there are some rapprochement between Turkey and Saudi Arabia in that regard. But although they are on the same page regarding the Syrian conflict, there are also some differences as well. Turkey doesn't want to be seen as a sectarian power in the region. In that regard, although Turkey and Saudi Arabia are having a similar policy in the case of Syria, but in other issues, like for example the differences between between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Turkey also has some differences with Iran, but at the same time, Turkey is still a continuous relation with Iran. Also, we should not forget that Turkey and Iran has some regional differences, but at the same time, as two neighbors, they have some, in quotation marks, sometimes competition, but on the other hand, they continue their political relations and also economic relations. And the connections between Turkey and Saudi Arabia regarding the regional dynamics, there are some political consultation, but I don't think that this will be having a kind of military, like you asked, military type of framework or regional or international army to fight with these terrorist groups.
A gentleman over there.
Hi, very nice, interesting. Particularly my question is for Mr. Layton, but for the rest of the panelists as well.
And your name, sir?
Dr. Mark Meyerowitz from State University of New York. Here's my question about the terminology you use, Mr. Layton, to describe this ideal Iran-US-Turkey alliance rapprochement, sphere of stability. I just have a few flies in your ointment, if I may, since we're sitting here in the District of Columbia, where the Congress is and the President of the United States. I wonder what you think about the fact that Congress is up in arms about the Iran nuclear deal and the ballistic missile tests. Congress and American people are up in arms about the imprisonment of Jason Rezaian and the other Americans. And we have a presidential election coming, which could mean a new president and a complete upending of all the things that we're talking about. To me, what the United States is doing now is a short-term approach to dealing with the ISIS crisis, needing Iran's help to deal with that, because we don't want troops on the ground, and we need Iran's help. That looks like an empowerment, and also, I think, one of the reasons to motivate Obama to do the Iran nuclear deal the way he did. Okay. So what do you think about the prospects for these factors influencing what you're saying about how you look at the region?
Yeah. Do you think this is a short-term approach, or do you think we're seeing a reevaluation of U.S. alliances in the region?
That's a great question. And one quick note, you said you were from the State University of New York. That's where my dad taught. Which college are you from? Okay, very good. In the Bronx, there you go. There you go. He taught at Oswego, so at least it's the same. It was the same system. So the big issue here is the conflict between the ideal and the desired outcome and reality on the ground. So I think, Barbara, to your point, this is very much a short-term, there are a lot of, let's put it this way, there are a lot of short-term expediencies in what the current administration is doing. So having said what I said earlier, that was a broad, this is what is desired out there. We want to achieve this kind of a confluence between Iran and the United States. However, the reality of the situation is exactly, it's twofold. One is the short-term nature of a lot of things that happen in Washington. Part of it is, you hit the nail on the head with Congress and the presidential election. There are a lot of things that will absolutely change because of whatever happens in November. Even if another Democrat gets elected to the White House, there will be things that will change. A lot will also depend on exactly what the congressional makeup is. So since this is an election where a lot of people are going to be up for election on Capitol Hill, they will make sure that some of this foreign policy piece will definitely become an issue. People are scared of what is happening with ISIS. They are scared about what is happening overseas. They see what happened not only in San Bernardino, but they saw what happened in Paris. And because of that, that will color the American response to everything that we're talking about. And you're right, it could all be upended based on this. However, there are also some significant strategic truths that are also going to be part of whatever happens in this. And so whichever administration takes over in after January 2017, they will be confronted with several choices. Do they continue to, in essence, continue the rapprochement with Iran, or do they go ahead and say, no, we want to bolster the Sunni nations, just as an example? So, Saudi Arabia, once again, assumes the ascendancy in the American policy pantheon and is supported once again. A lot of people look at this as, one thing that you mentioned, which I thought was very interesting also, is the fact that the United States is, by its very nature, a temporary presence in many parts of the world. Personally, I think that's a huge mistake. Huge mistake. But given the fact that that is a reality, we have these isolationist phases that we tend to go through, or neo-isolationist phases that we tend to go through, that affects how we engage militarily. It also means that I think in some ways we learn some lessons that are maybe not quite accurate when it comes to foreign involvement in certain places. So as a result of that, we, the United States, become very gun-shy about doing certain things, and the result could very well be that we see a temporary change or even a more permanent change in how Iran is approached. And that obviously has implications for the U.S.-Turkish relationship as well.
Trita, if I could ask you a question that's related to that. Do you think that there are people in Iran who are seeing this latest behavior by Saudi Arabia as an opportunity to actually improve the relationship with the United States? I mean, one had to note that John Kerry had a much easier time getting Javad Zarif on the phone over the weekend than he did Adel al-Jubeir.
Thank you, Barbara. I think, first and foremost, the perception in Iran has been that this was a deliberate attempt to escalate manners and to create a conflict. And a conflict that would force the United States to take sides. The United States president made it very clear to King Abdullah before he passed away, saying that the United States is trying to resolve its tensions with Iran, and it suggested Saudi Arabia does the same. It was signaling very clear that the United States is not going to be an instrument that will be a part of Saudi Arabia and Iran's own strategic rivalries that go back decades and centuries. Given that, the Americans essentially made clear that we're not going to take sides. Take a look at Mike Mullen's piece in the Politico a couple of months ago, in which he said that the Iran deal would be good because it would enable the United States to rebalance its relationship between the Sunni and the Shia divide. The Saudis view this as a betrayal. They view themselves as allies of the United States, and as a result, the United States needs to side with Saudi Arabia whenever he has a conflict with Iran, just as much as Saudi Arabia did side largely with the United States when the United States had a policy of containing Iran. I think you mentioned that the United States trained the Arabs on how to oppose Iran. Now the United States is no longer interested in opposing the Iranians, and the Saudis are like, you know, what happened? Yemen, I think, fits the same pattern. It was an attempt to be able to force the United States into the old pattern of siding with the Saudis against Iran. And the president, in my view, wisely has decided not to fall into that trap. The Iranians themselves, however, gladly walked into that trap by going and attacking the Saudi embassy. And a news story that otherwise would have been the lack of sense of executing these 47, particularly the Sheikh, knowing very well that this would spark outrage throughout the region, ended up, at least for a few days, being about, you know, what are the Iranians doing, attacking yet another embassy? But to see it as an opportunity to re-engage with the Saudis, I think maybe to go too far, because I think what the Iranians are seeing, the way they're viewing it, is that they want to see a movement towards the United States. But their litmus tests have shifted over time on whether the United States is ready to do so or not. It tended to be whether the United States was willing to take a policy different from that of Israel. And the JCPOA clearly showed that, yes, Barack Obama is very much willing to do so and to pay the domestic political price for doing so. Now the litmus test is, how independent is the United States of Saudi Arabia? The Iranians were very disappointed and very upset of their view that the United States ended up being too supportive of Saudi Arabia in its attack on Yemen, even though I'm sure they did know that the United States was not particularly pleased with that attack, and many White House officials gave anonymous comments in the press completely questioning and ripping apart the Saudi narrative that the Houthis are just some sort of a proxy group of the Iranians, and gave shared intelligence assessment that showed that, you know, that relationship is much more complex than that. But the Iranians were very disappointed in that, and they're essentially seeing that they see as a major barrier for them to be able to improve relations with the United States unless the United States shows itself to be more independent of Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thanks a lot. Over in the corner there. Jump in if you want to. Here, I ask you to. If you want to say more.
My name is Hisham Al-Talib from IIIT, International Institute of Islamic Thought. I have a question to Trita and Leighton, because I am really impressed by the depth of their analysis. The question is, there is not enough emphasis in all the media and the think tanks in the area about the real causes of the hell that is happening in the Middle East. I think I want them to comment on the impact of these three things, factors that really affect the problems in the Middle East now. And that is number one, the occupation of Palestine for about 60 years. Number two, the unnecessary Iraqi war. Number three, the hypocritical foreign policy of our government towards dictators in the area. They preach democracy, but practice and support dictatorship. As an electrical engineer, I give you my figure for this impact. It is 1,000,000%. Thank you.
Okay. I would encourage actually our other speakers to come in on this as well, not just Trita and Cedric. Turkey, for example, I mean, the first big rift with Turkey came in 2003. I remember it well when Colin Powell was flying to Incirlik Air Base and begging for Turkish support in the invasion of Iraq, and that kind of set all this train in motion. Would you like to offer some thoughts about the overall policy of the United States and how it's perceived in Turkey?
And United States policy.
Yeah. As the gentleman suggested, I mean, the U.S. has not forced a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian issue. That's certainly been a problem with Turkey, particularly this government. The invasion of Iraq, we all remember that. Yeah. And support for dictators.
Of course, the Iraqi invasion is one of the important driving force behind the current Middle Eastern, instability. In terms of, affecting many different aspects of the Middle Eastern historical, ingredients, what made the Middle East in the historical context, were affected after the United States invasion, and we, began to witnessing a kind of new Middle East after the United States invasion of Iraq. And of course, after regarding the Arab Spring, each country has their own, strategic planning and their risk assessment. And particularly Turkey, of course, has its own strategic planning and its risk assessment. When in the international relations, you need to, first of all, look at the intention and the capacity of the other countries, or other non-state actors after the Arab Spring, particularly non-state military actors. And you determine your foreign policy priorities according to these two things. I mean, the intention and the capacity. And I think there is an important, different understanding between United States and Turkey, particularly vis-a-vis the Syrian crisis and Daesh. But the Daesh is particularly important, in understanding both countries' strategic priority. Turkey believes that the Daesh is the result of the Syrian conflict, and the United States believe that the Daesh is not a result of the Syrian crisis, and that therefore Turkey firstly believes that first of all the Syrian crisis should be solved, and after the Daesh crisis or the conflict between different groups in the region will be the solved. And I think the main problem is about the strategic priority on the Syrian crisis.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts you want to add to that, or?
These are some excellent points and some great questions. So I'll take them one at a time from my perspective. So, word of warning: this is going to be a personal perspective, not a government perspective. The occupation of Palestine, clearly, probably the greatest unsolved issue of the Middle East. Period. I think that the United States has always had an issue with the domestic political constituency that was very supportive of Israel, and it was in a situation where it dared not go against that domestic political constituency for a long time. Now, there are several factors that limit America's support for Israel in certain specific areas. Number one that I remember quite well, when there was an indication that Israel would go and attack Iran because of its nuclear weapons development program. The United States worked very hard behind the scenes to prevent Israel from doing that. So, just using that one example, then there are plenty others to draw from, but it's very clear that the United States is not interested in destroying Iran or in laying waste to its military or to that specific capability, the nuclear capability, as nascent as it may be. So if you take that, the United States is clearly also pursuing, specifically to the Palestinian question, is trying to pursue a two-state solution with this issue. It impacts on the domestic situation, political situation in Israel, in a way in which many Israelis are certainly supportive of that, and the government, depending on which government you get, is at times supportive of that. But the two-state solution is one that will require buy-in from both sides. So the United States finds itself in a situation where, on the one hand, it wants to make sure that Palestinians are properly represented politically through their own state, but by the same token, they also want to make sure that the security of Israel is assured. So domestically, there is that balance that has to be achieved for the American political landscape. And if there is any indication that there is a failure to assure Israel's domestic security, then, or that there's some loophole in any agreement that is achieved, then it's going to be difficult for an American administration to go that extra mile. They're also going to be looking for support within the Arab world to not only make sure that the Palestinian state that is created actually can stand on its own, but that it also has the requisite economic aid, like the Gulf states, for example, that is provided to this. Now, clearly the Gulf states do provide a lot of assistance to the Gaza Strip and to the West Bank, but those are factors that play into that. On the Iraq War, the Iraq War was, certainly is very controversial. Free knowledge, I participated in the beginning phase of the Iraq War. It was, from a military standpoint, purely a military standpoint, it was an amazing, showed an amazing capacity of the United States to do certain things at the very beginning. The problem was what happened afterwards. That Saddam Hussein was a bad actor, I think most Americans would say he needed to go. The problem was the what comes after question. So that has a direct bearing on how we're responding to the Syrian situation and why it is more palatable today to allow Assad to remain in power. They don't want a repeat of what happened in Baghdad, and clearly Syria is probably magnitudes more complex than Iraq was from an ethnic tension standpoint, an ethnic division standpoint. So that is, the Iraq War is informing the way in which we are dealing with the policy situation. And it plays right into your third question about supporting dictatorships as opposed to freedom and democracy. I think there was an attempt made, getting back to a brief discussion we had about Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, an attempt was made to view what was happening in Egypt at that time as part of the Arab Spring as being the harbinger of democracy for the Middle East, especially, most populous nation in the Arab world. That was a great, theoretically a great model for that. When it came to the point where there were significant issues with the way in which the Muslim Brotherhood exercised its power within Egypt, that was something that then resulted in a pullback of support from the United States and from other nations, and it also, whether tacitly or otherwise, it still was a significant factor, and it brought the United States back into, okay, we love the ideal of democracy and we want everybody to have it, but the reality of the world is, and this is what people are saying, not that it's necessarily the correct way to look at things, but they're looking at it as, we love democracy, but the reality of the world is such that many countries either A, aren't ready for it, in quotation marks, or they are there are certain other factors, certain dangers that that country or that society face that cannot be handled by some of the institutions that are weak or that are subject to political disputes, and that creates I think, part of the policy problem that you have. Jimmy Carter tried to do that back in his day, tried to support democracy. The problem was that many countries didn't have lasting democratic institutions, and that is what you're confronted with. It works great in Western Europe. It doesn't work in other places, or not on a sustained basis.
Let me stop you there. We're getting close to the end of the session, and I see still a number of hands up. So I want to grab 2 more questions in the back. There's a lady there, and then Jim Loeb and Barry. Yeah, those 3. Let's take those 3, and then we'll give everybody a chance to pick a question to answer and also to sum up. So starting with the lady, all the way in the back, yeah.
Hi, my name is Hevi Buzo. I'm the Bureau Chief of Orient TV in Washington. I want to start my first question with Mr. Paris, or
Parsi.
Parsi,
Yeah.
Sorry. So I just wanted to kind of comment on something he mentioned, was where he said that Iran wanted to be viewed as a stabilization force in the Middle East. But in reality, what do you answer to the people who say that Iran has been killing Syrian innocent people based on sectarian tensions or sectarian identity because they're Sunni versus Shia, and that there was whatever is happening in Syria was a revolution against a dictatorship. And actually, this would cause ISIS to be created in Syria. So ISIS started in Syria due to the Iran intervention and the silence of the international community. The second part of that's okay to Mr. Mesut. What do you think about President Erdogan saying that they're going to create a no-fly zone in the northern part of Syria? Thank you.
Okay, and let's get. I think she meant you then. Let's take the other 2. Jim? So no-fly zone, okay.
Jim Loeb, IPS. To anyone who cares to answer, I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of this panel, but if it didn't come up, could you address the recent news that Erdogan and Bibi Netanyahu may be trying to work things out a little more seriously? And what would be the regional implications, particularly with respect to Turkey's relations with Iran and with the Syrian civil war?
Okay, and finally, Barry, right there. Yeah.
Barry Jacobs from the Spectrum Group, but I'm also a retired Foreign Service officer. Very briefly, and I apologize, I had to miss a few minutes. I had a phone call. Has anyone mentioned the question that Turkey shot down a Soviet...
Russian.
I'm showing my age, right. A Russian jet, really unnecessarily, over its own territory. And I'm curious internally about, and I haven't seen any polls, what does Turkish public opinion think, not only about Turkey's actions with Syria, but Turkish foreign policy, which it seems to me if it was a parliamentary form of government, they would have thrown out first Davutoğlu when he was the foreign minister and the current foreign minister, because Turkey is isolated today.
Wow. All right, I think we're going to start with Murat and take what you want, add what you want from whatever you failed to say during the last hour or so, and we'll go down the line.
Okay, I think there are many, framework regarding the no-fly zone, and we have also the ISIS-free zone and no-fly zone, and security or buffer zone. There are many, concepts regarding this issue. Of course, this is a part. This is the concepts are the part of the issue, because the different concepts, require different, implementation and different, military preparation in terms of implementing on the ground. But I think the main problem here is the difference between United States and Turkey vis-a-vis what kind of military implementation will be used in the Turkey-Syrian border, just in the very close to the province of Hatay, and west of the Euphrates, and between Jarablus and Aziz. We are, I think, talking about 100 kilometers, a buffer zone region. But I think the main problem is the difference between United States and Turkey. And I think United States does not want to support this kind of idea. After the, particularly after the Russian involvement in the crisis, it's going to be very hard to implement this kind of, buffer or security zone, and Turkey does not want to, implement this kind of security zone by itself because it's going to be very hard for Turkey in this area when we think about the different actors in this region, including Daesh, in PYD, and other, other rebellion groups or other opponent groups. So I think it is too hard to talk about anymore this kind of zone, military zone, in near future.
Mesut, would you agree that even though it's been talked about continually for the last 2, 3, 4 years, that, and even Hillary Clinton has once again proposed it, that this no-fly zone is not going to happen? And also, if you could comment about the wisdom of shooting down the Russian jet, or lack thereof, and how that has, isolated Turkey perhaps even more. Yeah.
Yep. I tried to summarize during my short presentation about the Turkish-Syrian relation. Also, it's similar to the Cold War mentality, and the Russian plane can be interpreted in that regard as well. This no-fly zone was on the agenda of the conflict of solution to the conflict of Syria. But although Turkey proposed this idea for several times, and some people, as you mentioned, from the United States also advocated the same idea, but Obama administration didn't support this, so we didn't have such a zone. I don't know how likely it is from now on, but if we want to have a solution, then we should think about some other alternatives as well, if this is not possible. Regarding this Russian plane, Turkish policymakers also several times mentioned that they didn't want to have such a scenario, but they also warned several times the Russians in that regard. And from the Turkish point of view, Russians were trying to test Turkish limits here, although this created a kind of tension between Turkey and Russia. But on the other hand, this space was violated, and Turkey warned this. There were several other violations as well beforehand in the last couple of months before this accident. So this happened. Actually, this was not the intention of Turkey, but unfortunately, the conflict in Syria is having also regional implications and also affecting Turkish relations with Russia and also Iran as well. And also, I want to say also a few words about Israel issue. Netanyahu.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So there are talks going on between Turkish and Israeli officials, and lately in the last couple of weeks there was another meeting between Turkish and Israeli diplomats in Zurich. Although there were some points agreed before as well, so there are talks going on about other terms. So the latest news leaked to the press by the Israeli side is also then confirmed by Turkish officials as well. So there are some talks going on, and this is very much related with the regional dynamics as well, but we cannot say it is finalized till today. So we will see if there will be some more talks in the near future in that regard, and then we may have an understanding regarding this.
There was a report, I think, that Turkey is still insisting that the blockade of Gaza be lifted. Is that correct?
There are talks, as I said, there are some ways how to find a kind of understanding on this, and I think these two countries will have a formula.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Trita, Iran killing many innocent Syrians?
Sure.
And contributing to the growth of Daesh?
Yeah, if we start off with Daesh, Daesh did not start in Syria. Daesh started in Iraq. It's remnants of Saddam's regime combined with various jihadists, etc. So I don't really see that being a creation of Iran. The Syrian conflict is taken on a significant sectarian profile, but that's not the way it started. I think you yourself pointed out that this was originally an uprising against a dictator, and many of those who rose up against the dictator were not necessarily Sunni, they were Alawites as well. But over time, unfortunately, it's taken on a much more sectarian character. I think the part of the problem that I have, and this is a common question, not necessarily if it's Iran specifically or stuff, but there's this rather naive search for good actors in the region. challenge you to find a single good actor. Every government is involved in things that are highly problematic. Some of them have been quite lenient towards ISIS. Some of them have been funding many of these jihadists that are taking place, that are doing all of these different things, not just in Syria, but throughout. The question is how we get out of this cycle, rather than thinking that there is some sort of a moral specter in which some states really qualify and others really disqualify. I think it's a major mistake. It's not going to lead us towards a solution.
Okay, and final words?
Well, there are a lot of different areas to cover here. I think I'll take the no-fly zone piece in northern Syria. There are a lot of lessons to be learned by what the United States did before the Iraq War with its 2 no-fly zones in what we called Operation Southern Watch and Operation Northern Watch, which of course was based in Turkey, during the period after the first Gulf War. And in some ways it was effective in containing what was going on. The problem that you have though with a no-fly zone is the fact that besides the Syrian Air Force and now the Russian Air Force, there are no other air forces that ISIS, for example, or Daesh has. There's no air force to go against. What it could do, though, is it could create a safety bubble for the refugees. So that would be one thing that could potentially be there. On Erdogan and Netanyahu, President Erdogan and Prime Minister Netanyahu trying to work things out, I think this is an inevitable reaction to what is going on. I think both countries, both Turkey and Israel, have, believe it or not, common interests, and what you're seeing is them trying to find a way forward in which those common interests can be expressed and can be worked on and in essence facilitated. So the ideal thing, of course, if you want to totally reduce tensions, would be to have all of these states, including Iran and Israel, working to achieve a common area of stability, but that would not be a realistic option at the moment, I'm afraid. And as far as the shoot down of the Russian Su-24, I did comment on that on CNN when it first happened. The problem that you run into is when you're looking at it from a technical standpoint, the reaction times were very quick. I mean, the airplane was basically in Turkish airspace for 18 seconds. That's a very short time in which to make a decision like that. But the other side of that argument is obviously there had been a lot of, as was mentioned previously, there had been a lot of provocations from the Russian side against Turkey. So it was inevitable that something would have happened. It was not good that it happened in that way, in my view. But we are dealing with the reality that it did happen, and that's something that both Turkey and Russia, need to work toward to solve. Otherwise, it's going to be even more of a mess than it already is.
Right. Well, on that happy note, thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to the audience, and to be continued. Thank you. I thought I didn't cut you off too much there, but we had to get everyone in.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Pleasure.